Hello and welcome back to Solomon's Cave and the first video on owls? Yes, you read that title and thumbnail correctly. I made a video about owls. But why? Well, I have been making a bunch of videos about creation and evolution. Long videos where I give a broad introduction into a number of topics related to evolution and creationism. But despite their length, these videos stay superficial and I only talk in general terms. To complement these general introductory videos, I thought it would be interesting to see the debate in action, as it were, through the lens of one particular example or case study. And I have chosen owls. In this first video, I will therefore talk about what an owl is and how, broadly speaking, the question of whether owls evolved or were created plays itself out. So, what is an owl? Taxonomically, owls can be found in the domain of the Eukaryota, the kingdom of the Animalia, the phylum of Chordata, and the class of Aves, commonly known as birds. Within the class of birds, there are a number of subclasses, but once you reach the order of Strigiformes, you have arrived at destination owl. Within this order, we find two extant families, namely the Strigidae, or true owls, and the Titonidae, which includes barn owls, bay owls, and grass owls, or for my Dutch-speaking audience, kerkuilen. One way to distinguish between these two families is the shape of their faces. The Titonidae have a more heart-shaped face disc, while the Strigidae have a rounder face disc or sometimes virtually no face disc. Other differences exist in the shape of their eggs, their claws, their tails, and their wishbone and breastbone. However, some taxonomists think that these two families, though distinguishable, should perhaps be seen as two subfamilies rather than full families, given how closely they resemble each other. Also note that within the Strigidae family there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of variation. These two families can be further divided into dozens of genera and by one count 250 species. So even though owls are a very recognizable kind of bird, there is a lot of variation here. Besides these two families of living owls, there are a few extinct families which are known from fossils. But what exactly makes an owl, or even more directly, what is an owl? Owls are a typically nocturnal, carnivorous land bird. They have a large head with front-facing eyes, a sharp beak that is curved downward, with sharp, powerful, four-toed claws for feet. They have a short tail and soft or fluffy or poofy feathers that are typically colored and patterned for camouflage. These fluffy feathers tend to make owls look bigger and rounder than they really are, at least compared to other birds. This becomes clear when owls are wet. When they are younger, they tend to have more downy feathers, and in some instances, older owls tend to lose the color of their feathers and become paler or white. They have very sharp hearing, and some species can even hunt in absolute darkness by sound alone, in part aided by the fact that their ears are at different heights, and in part because their ears are not two small round holes, as in most birds and mammals, but two vertical slits. Most owls can roughly hear the same frequencies or pitches as humans can, but they can hear much lower decibels. Some species can pick up sounds 10 times better than humans. What also helps owls to hear, especially the species that only hunt at night, are their so-called face discs. This disc functions like an earlobe, as it catches and directs sounds. In fact, they can manipulate the precise shape of their face discs with special muscles. Oh, and those things sticking out at the top of their heads, or some species of owls at least, Those are not ears, but those are ear tufts, and they have actually nothing to do with hearing. Their ears are on the sides of their head. And speaking of sound, their soft-edged feathers in turn allow them to fly extremely quietly. Here's a little experiment they did for a BBC video. First, they make a pigeon fly over some very sensitive microphones.
Good.
Next, a bird of prey. And finally, a barn owl. Did you hear that? Yeah, neither did I. When there is even the slightest amount of light, their sensitive eyes come into play. Barn owls, for example, have eyes that are 35 times more sensitive to light than human eyes. In fact, their eyes are so large that there is no space in their heads to rotate those eyes. They are more oval or tube-shaped than round, and thus they are kind of stuck in a so-called sclerotic ring. So they have to tilt their heads and rotate their necks instead, which they can do up to 270 degrees, which is 3/4 of an entire circle. A trick for which they make full use of their 14 neck vertebrae. For comparisons, humans only have 7 of those. Owls also often bob and sway their head, likely to help them estimate distance. Both at night and during the day, they generally have a better eyesight than humans, but their ability to see color is somewhat less, though the few owls that hunt by day typically see more color than their nocturnal cousins. Diet. Owls typically eat animals. Depending on their size and what is available, they can eat insects and spiders, snails, worms, crabs, mice, lizards, snakes, frogs, or even other birds. Some larger owls hunt and eat hares and even young foxes and ducks. Small animals are usually first killed and then swallowed whole, head first, letting their intestines do most of the digestive work. Larger prey is typically dismembered or torn apart first, and if there's sufficient food around, owls may even opt to leave the leftovers in little caches. Bone, skin, nails, hairs, and other indigestible parts of animals can be vomited out in pellets. Nesting. Unlike many other birds, owls do not build nests. Instead, they do things like digging shallow pits in the ground. Sometimes they soften them up with some food remains or pellets. At other times, they find a small corner of a building like a barn or a church tower, or a tree stump. The abandoned nests of other birds can also be utilized, or sometimes they live in underground burrows. There is virtually no limit to where an owl might want to nest, as long as it is mildly protected from the elements. Life cycle. The life cycle of an owl begins with singing. At the end of the winter, or in tropical climates at the end of the dry season, male and female owls begin to sing to attract their mates. This singing we know as hooting. And though owls often hoot for different reasons as well, male owls primarily hoot for this reason. Different species have different levels of long-term pairing. Some seek a new mate every season, others every couple of seasons, and some mate for life. After mating, the female owl is pregnant for a few weeks, after which she begins to lay eggs. The eggs are white and either oval or round, depending on which family. They are laid in succession, usually 1 or 2 days apart, and depending on the species and on the availability of food, clutches can be as small as 1 egg or as large as 14. After laying her eggs, the female incubates while the male brings the food. Since the eggs are laid a few days apart, they also hatch a few days apart, after which they are usually fed and taken care of for a couple of weeks, or a few months at the most. After that, they're on their own. In the wild, they live between 6 and 20 years, with, as a rule of thumb, you can say that larger owls tend to live longer, and in captivity their lifespan can be expanded. Sound. And then the question every child can answer. What sound does an owl make? Yes, they hoot! Woohoo! As I mentioned before, hooting can be a mating call, but they also serve other functions, like marking territory or expressing emotions. Owls can also recognize each other by their hoots, so they can use it to identify themselves. Besides hooting, owls can also screech, squawk, scream, and whistle. And in addition to that, they can also click with their beaks. But speaking of hooting, they can hoot either directly from their lungs or from an air sac or throat patch in which they can pump some air. And filling that throat patch with air and blowing it up is already part of the communication, as it shows potential competitors how big they are. Here's a short clip from a great horned owl hooting both ways successively. Evolution and creationism. Within evolutionary science, owls are said to have evolved from early birds and bird-like creatures, which in turn evolved from dinosaurs, reptiles, and fish, etc., all the way until we reach the earliest and most primitive forms of life. Biologists argue for this based on facts like how well the owl fits neatly in the phylogenetic tree and a number of transitional fossils. They also point out how different species of owls have adapted to their current environments due to evolutionary processes like natural selection. Next, evolution also predicts that owls likely have some vestigial features from their evolutionary ancestors. Most famously, the great grey owl has tiny, almost invisible wing claws which are believed to be vestigial. Finally, evolution predicts that no feature of an owl is irreducibly complex, and that every feature owls have can be explained by a series of small, gradual changes which nature can select for. The proposed evolutionary history and relationships to other types of birds will be explored in future videos, but based on DNA and molecular biology, the closest living relatives of owls are believed to be diurnal raptors, or birds of prey, like eagles and vultures. Though interestingly enough, not the falcon, which is believed to have split off earlier in their evolutionary history. Also, parrots are a relatively close evolutionary cousin. There are also a number of fossilized owls that have been found. The oldest of them are typically dated to the Paleocene epoch, which, by the standard dating of the geologic column, was some 56 to 65 million years ago, shortly after the extinction of the dinosaurs. How do creationists approach owls? Well, from the outset there are at least two things that creationists say. First, they will likely point to a number of features of owls and claim that they are beautifully designed, and they would look specifically for features that are irreducibly complex. For example, they might look at an owl's eyes, or a feather, or the cells that make up the body of an owl, and they will conclude that no series of small, cumulative changes could have produced such a structure naturally. Secondly, creationists, at least some types of creationists, would look for a kind. That is, they believe that God created different kinds of animals and plants. A kind is a self-contained clade or group of organisms that share a common ancestor. Animals of the same kind could originally interbreed, even if perhaps they can no longer do so today. But animals of one kind cannot now, nor at any point in the past, interbreed with animals from a different kind, since they do not share a common ancestor. Now, it isn't immediately clear whether creationists argue or would argue that all owls form a single kind, whether owls form multiple kinds, perhaps the two families, or perhaps that owls are only part of a kind that also includes eagles and vultures, for example. But in a future video we'll tackle that question more systematically using the standards and methodologies of those very same creationists. For the final part of this video, let's meet an owl. At the end of each of these owl videos, I want to take a closer look at one particular species of owls and see what makes them unique and special. And for this video, let's have a look at the snowy owl. Its formal name is Bubo scandiacus, from the Strigidae family. In the same genus, Bubo, we find among others the horned owl, the eagle owl and the fishing owl. Previously, snowy owls were in a genus all of their own, so sometimes you may still encounter their old name, Nyctea scandiaca. They are large, between 53 and 66 centimeters or 20.5 and 26 inches tall, and they have a wingspan of 115 to 150 centimeters or 45 to 60 inches. They are incredibly beautiful, with a mostly white feather coat, which also covers their legs and feet. Their coat has some brown patterning as well. These thick, fur-like feathers allow it to keep its normal body temperature, even when the weather gets really cold. They can survive temperatures as low as -60 Celsius or -80 Fahrenheit. Newly hatched owls are dowy and at first grey and then brownish, before they slowly turn into their adult plumage. Males tend to be smaller and lighter than females and have fewer and smaller brown spots. The mean male weighs 1730 grams or 3.8 pounds, while the mean females weigh 2120 grams or 4.6 pounds. The fact that females are slightly larger and heavier is very typical for owls, by the way. They have a small, round head and very small ear tufts, which are usually flat and thus rarely seen. Their eyes are yellow with black eyelids, and their beaks and talons are also black. Snowy owls usually mate for life, and raise one nest of young each year, provided there's enough food. If there is enough food, they can lay up to 14 eggs, the most of any owl species. They build their nests in shallow holes on top of minor elevations of the tundra. Given the fact that the terrain is typically flat, they have a good view of their surroundings, and they pluck nearby plants to ensure a good line of sight. They usually scratch out the rough shape of a bowl and put a bit of padding on the floor of things like feathers and other soft things they can quickly find. They lay eggs with 2-day intervals between May and June, and incubate them for about a month. Typically the female broods over the nest and feeds the young, while the male hunts for food and defends the nest. A little over a month after hatching, the young begin their flight training, which takes about 2 months. If you keep track of the calendar, we are now approaching the fall or winter. And by the end of their second year, they may find their own mate and start the cycle again. And here is one of the cutest shorts, where you can hear a snowy owl hooting.
Can I get a hoot? Oh, thank you.
A great video of a snowy owl, as you can really see the throat patch fill up before he hoots. And here are some more sounds that snowy owls make. Ornithologists have distinguished 6 different notes of hoots, but when you disturb a snowy owl, they don't typically hoot, but they bark or they go. They live in the northern hemisphere, and their non-breeding region covers a big chunk of North America and northern Europe and Asia, where they live on the open tundra beyond the tree line. During the breeding seasons, they can be found a lot farther north. This makes them one of the relatively few owl species that are nomadic. They typically prefer to live on a higher elevation than their surroundings. And though most owls are nocturnal, snowy owls are active during the day, almost by necessity, as they spend their summers in the northern tundra where the sun barely sets for months at a time. During both seasons, they prefer to stay close to the coastline. This is because their diet in part consists of crabs and occasionally fish, but their favorite food are lemmings, small mammals that live underground. In fact, during the breeding season, their diet almost exclusively consists of lemmings. A male owl sometimes flies dozens of kilometers from his nest to hunt for these little critters. Besides that, they also eat other small rodents, small and medium-sized birds up to ducks and duck-sized birds, and insects like beetles. Snowy owls are also known to fly hundreds and in some cases thousands of kilometers, presumably in search of a location that is good for breeding and feeding. In 2014, the total number of adult snowy owls was estimated to be some 28,000 or 14,000 breeding pairs, which is a lot fewer than previously estimated, so they were put on the threatened species list. Since then, no major study of similar scope has been conducted, but a few local studies suggest that the population is shrinking. One interesting fact about owls is that they live on every continent. Yes, they have even been found on Antarctica. And they live in every country and virtually every region except for the inner part of Greenland. So, let me know in the comments what kinds of owls can be found where you live. Thanks for watching. If you want to support me on Patreon or become a member on YouTube, follow the links in the description so you can see my videos early, vote on topics, ask questions, and more. In the next owl video, we will have a look at the evolutionary history of owls. Which species were its proposed ancestors? Which ancient fossils of owls do we have? And how did those earliest owls evolve into the 2 families and hundreds of species we have today? And indeed, in that video, I do not expect to discuss the creationist perspective on owls. That will have to wait for subsequent videos.